A lot is happening and I want to share this with you guys. Please grab your popcorn and your drink, sit down and let's talk. Today we got some serious topic. President Trump just declared Cuba a security threat. And on top of that, he blocked all international oil shipping going to the country. Hey, that's a lot to unpack. Now, this is the deal. Because Cuba depends on imported oil for pretty much everything, electricity, transportation, even just everyday life. With this block, things are going to get really tight for regular people there. And it's not funny. You have to think about what this actually means. It isn't just politics or some headline. It's real families, real kids, real communities. They are going to feel the impact. Honestly, it shows how powerful this decision can be and how much they can shake up the entire community. Welcome to my channel. My name is Faith, and if this is your first time here, please like, share and hit the notification bell. Credit goes to the original creators for every single clip used in this episode. We've got some more clips coming your way, so stay tuned. Let's chat.
Having declared Cuba a security threat, Trump is blocking international oil shipments to the ruined island. The dictatorship could get Trump to ease up by correcting its brutal human rights record or reforming its catastrophic economic policies, but that's not going to happen, at least not until 94-year-old regime patriarch Raul Castro dies, which is probably not going to happen either. So Cuba will have to find something else to negotiate with, and fast. Not for the sake of regular suffering Cubans, but because the comfortable lives of party bosses and military brass are at risk if the oil deliveries dry up. Their survival may depend on offering Trump the only thing they have left for him, and that's mentoring. Call it crude for consulting. If they want to see fuel imports again, they can offer Trump help with his bid to turn America into his own private Cuba. They can be his tyranny tutors.
Why does Donald Trump want to break Cuba? There will be no more oil or money going to Cuba. Zero. It's partly about timing.
Conditions continue to worsen in Cuba as the U.S. cuts off critical supplies to the communist regime there.
But it might also be deeply personal.
Cuba is a disaster. It's run by incompetent, senile men.
Cuba is going to be something we'll end up talking about because Cuba is a failing nation right now, very badly failing nation.
Timing-wise, Cuba has almost never been weaker. It's literally in the dark. Chronic blackouts. Because to generate electricity, Cuba needs oil. But it can't get enough oil because the U.S. is blocking its two main sources of oil, Venezuela.
President Trump says the U.S. carried out large-scale strikes on Venezuela overnight.
They lived off Venezuelan money and oil, and none of that's coming now.
And Mexico. The U.S. has put immense pressure on both countries to choke Cuba's energy supply.
The Cuban government is really in a difficult position right now. It is in the midst of a humanitarian crisis.
But also, look who's advising Trump on foreign policy.
Do you want to say something about that, Marco, please?
Well, I just gave you a statement a few minutes ago about, when the president speaks, you should take him seriously.
Trump's Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, is the son of Cuban immigrants. And for those who feel like they've lost a great deal in Castro's socialist revolution in the 1960s, their literal homes in many cases, punishing the regime is personal.
Yeah, look, if I lived in Havana and I was in the government, I'd be concerned.
He made his political career based on hostility toward the Cuban government. And so, in some ways, the policy of hostility towards Cuba is very much his personal policy.
But finally, consider how this might be personal for Donald Trump, too.
13 U.S. presidents have come and gone, and the Castro regime remains in power.
Cuba's communist existence has been a real knot of tension for the U.S. for the better part of a century. If Donald Trump were to undo that knot,
finally bringing down a communist regime that's been 90 miles off the coast of the U.S. would be a huge feather in the cap of Donald Trump.
Being able to say that I am the U.S. president who did the thing that no other U.S. president since 1959 was able to do, which was end the Cuban Revolution and the Cuban communist government.
What a crowning achievement that would be.
Are you trying to choke off Cuba?
I don't know. The word choke off is awfully tough. Cuba is a failing nation, and you have to feel badly for Cuba. They've treated people very badly. We have a lot of Cuban Americans who really were treated very badly, and they'd probably like to go back. And no, I'm not trying to, but it looks like it's something that's just not going to be able to survive. I think Cuba will not be able to survive.
It may seem harsh that the Trump administration is denying oil and resources to Cuba, but let's slow it down. See, Cuba has been dealing with severe economic hardship for years. The people, not the government. Power outages, food shortages, fuel shortages, and zero economic freedom. And that's where it gets complicated. When outside countries send oil or financial support directly to the Cuban government, that support can stabilize the regime. It doesn't improve life for every day. At the same time, Trump is bringing together leaders from Latin America in Miami. Why? Because regional alignment matters. Having influence from successful South American leaders will matter. Energy routes, trade partnerships. This isn't random. It's geopolitical positioning. And the real question is, do the American people have the stomach for this kind of economic pressure, which will ultimately create reform? Or does it deepen the hardships against the strategies of the Trump administration? That's the debate.
Here is your daily friendly reminder that unless you are of Cuban descent, unless you still have family currently living on the island, unless you had to flee from the island or have family members that had to flee from the island, please keep your mouth shut about what is currently going on in Cuba. The narrative that you guys are creating about the U.S. embargo being the reason Cubans are suffering is absolutely disrespectful. Cuba is suffering because of its own regime and its own government. That is it. They are responsible, and saying anything other than that is disrespectful to all the suffering that people need to go through every single day. So respectfully, como dicen mi gente, cállate. Abajo la dictadura y que liberen a mi gente.
Cuba has about 2 weeks of oil left, maybe less, and I need you all to understand what that actually means. Cuba is about to become the next Gaza. In the last month alone, the US seized 5 oil tankers heading to Cuba. This is the largest naval deployment in the Caribbean since the Cuban Missile Crisis. They've got drones tracking Mexican tankers. And Trump signed an executive order threatening any country on earth that sells Cuba oil with tariffs. Mexico looked at $400 billion in trade exposure to the US and immediately stopped shipments. Venezuela's supply got destroyed by force, so now Cubans are experiencing 20-hour daily blackouts. Hospitals are running on generators that are about to run out of diesel. And Marco Rubio literally testified to Congress that regime change is the objective. Trump said, quote, "I think it's just going to fall." They're not even hiding it anymore. But here's the thing, this has been happening for decades. Every year at the UN, 187 nations vote to condemn the US embargo on Cuba, 33 consecutive years. The most lopsided vote in UN history. It's just the US and obviously Israel voting no. And every single year, every country that votes against the embargo lets their banks enforce it anyway. Why? Because 88% of all global foreign exchange transactions touch the US dollar because one country controls the pipes through which the world's money moves. And the US has fined foreign banks, BNP Paribas, HSBC, Societe Generale, banks from countries that oppose the embargo, over $13 billion in fines for processing Cuba-related payments. So most banks just refuse all Cuba operations now. 69% of necessary medicines are unavailable in Cuba, not scarce or not expensive, literally banned from entering the country. This is the same Cuban government that offered to send 1,500 doctors to help Americans after Hurricane Katrina. The Bush administration said no. During COVID, Cuba exported doctors across Latin America, whilst richer nations hoarded vaccines. They're literally renowned worldwide for training medical personnel and sending them to places like Palestine. Cuba has literacy rates that shame the US, and that's why the US would rather see Cuba become concentration camp than succeed, because if Cuba thrives, it proves there is an alternative, that capitalism and imperialism and endless exploitation aren't inevitable. The Cuban government is now calling this what it is, a genocidal blockade. They're preparing emergency measures to try to keep people in nursing homes and hospitals alive, rationing plans for millions. And this is literally life or death struggle for 11 million people. So if Cuba falls, it won't be because socialism doesn't work. It will be because the largest empire in human history, run by PDFs, spent 6 decades and trillions of dollars making sure it couldn't. Remember that when you see the headlines about failed states and economic collapse. This siege is the story. Everything else is just the obituary they are writing in advance.
The United States government has cut off oil imports to the tiny island of Cuba. It was mainly being supplied by Mexico and Venezuela, but we've threatened Mexico. And the reason that this is happening is because Marco Rubio has a boner for regime change on the island. We've essentially pitched 10 million people into darkness, rolling blackouts. Hospitals have to prioritize care. There are children with, just imagine you're sitting at home with your kids eating dinner and everything goes black. I mean, when have you ever seen democracy delivered through the barrel of a gun? It's very rare. It almost never happens. It certainly hasn't happened ever in post-World War II era. The idea, right? So I've seen Mexican tankers sending in like beans and rice, but they're saying we can't send oil because the United States is threatening us. What kind of country, what kind of great beacon of freedom and light, what kind of shining city on a hill threatens all of its neighbors? Kidnaps its neighbors' leaders, bombs its neighbors, bombed 8 countries last year. What kind of neighbor are we? What kind of people do you want to be? There are 10 million people on the island of Cuba that we have taken power from. Imagine in your home. Imagine in your home the power just goes out. Your kids can't play PlayStation. You can't cook food. You can't go get a medical procedure. This is the kind of country we want to be for regime change.
As more and more time goes by and oil shipments don't arrive to Cuba, stop by the Trump administration's insistence that countries are no longer able to send the Cuban government, any kind of oil, saying that Cuba represents a threat to the United States. We are seeing the impacts more and more here. There are less cars on the road. Now we're hearing that airlines are cutting flights to Cuba because there's not any jet fuel for them here to be able to refuel and bring the passengers back home. So this is, of course, going to have an impact. There'll be less tourists coming here. It really becomes a chain reaction for the already struggling Cuban economy. Mexico is sending aid, hundreds of tons of food, but they're not at this point sending any oil, under U.S. pressure to not do that. The Kremlin has said that Cuba is now facing a crisis, and the government here, essentially their ally, their old ally, is in deep trouble as what they call a U.S. chokehold continues on and on. We know the U.S. and Cuba are exchanging messages. They are holding talks. Remains to be seen, though, if any deal can be struck, because the U.S. is really insisting on regime change. The government leave power, open up to multi-party elections, that political prisoners here are freed, and a lot of other steps that the Cuban government, up until now, has been unwilling to agree to.
Breaking news, Trump is officially going after Cuba. Look at this. President Trump has signed a sweeping executive order declaring Cuba an unusual and extraordinary threat and authorizing broad new sanctions, including punishing foreign countries that sell oil to the island, even indirectly. Now, if you've been keeping up with the news, you would have known that Mexico had some sort of negotiation deal, and they stated that they were going to be providing Cuba with oil. And last night, Sheinbaum, the Mexican president, had announced, like, no, it had nothing to do with the United States. We just can't give them any oil. Well, the move comes as the Financial Times reports Cuba has just 15 to 20 days of oil left after the United States pressure helped halt Venezuelan shipments and Mexico's Pemex suspended a delivery. The shortage has already fueled near daily blackouts and fuel rationing. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum said that her government provides oil to Cuba via contracts with Pemex and via humanitarian aid mechanisms. The latter, she said, would continue. The order tightens a blockade strategy that leverages economic collapse and humanitarian crisis under the guise of national security. This is absolutely devastating because if you know anything about Cuba, you would know when they start like colando el café, like when they start brewing coffee, they sit with the same coffee grounds for days. They don't have anything. During COVID, they were short in medical supplies. That's constantly happening. This is a very impoverished country, and their cars are still from the 1940s to 60s. They are extremely behind in life. And when things like this happen, and I get it, there's drama with these countries, but when things like this happen, it's like, how can the Cubans ever move forward if they're constantly being stagnated and hindered and forced to remain in place while everybody else progress? So this is absolutely atrocious. I believe that the Mexican president should have just given them the oil and done whatever she wanted to do, because at the end of the day, that's her country. If she's giving out oil from her country and she wants to give it to Cuba, fuck what anybody else got to say. Because these people, like I just read, they are rationing oil. How are they supposed to cook? How are they supposed to have electricity? All of that is a culmination of this gets shortened, and then that's going to get shortened, and then this is going to get shortened, and then that's going to get shortened, and it's just going to be a domino effect of everybody getting fucked. So what are your thoughts in the comments?
The Trump administration has imposed a death sentence onto the island of Cuba. The oil blockade that the Trump administration has imposed on it through their actions in Venezuela will leave incubators not running and will leave people, especially with these increased restrictions, without vital medicines. This is meant to harm the people of Cuba so that they have so little and so many die that they overthrow their government. The goal is to maximize as much harm to ordinary people, not Cuban bureaucrats, not Cuban politicians. If you want to help, the Mayday Brigade is currently looking to raise money to be able to send medicine to Cuba. It is Bink in Lio. Otherwise, you can always boost.
Cuba has approximately 2 weeks of oil left thanks to the genocidal blockade that the U.S. regime has imposed on it. There are 20-hour daily blackouts, and hospitals are running on generators that are running out of diesel. Because the blockade affects Cuba's ability to get everything from medicine, food, to oil, there's a pediatric ward where children are vomiting around 30 times a day because they don't have access to anti-nauseating drugs. There was an 89-year-old lady who had to be implanted a pacemaker from a dead person with limited battery left. And this is very sad to see because Cubans shed their blood fighting against apartheid in Africa, fighting for the freedom of Angola and other countries struggling against colonialism. Cubans send doctors to every single corner of this planet, and for the poorer countries, they do it basically for free. They train up their whole medical healthcare systems. Cuban doctors have saved hundreds of thousands of lives around the world. In the 90s, when it looked like the hope of socialism was done and many thought that the world was just bound to be dominated by the parasitic global capitalist elite, it was countries like Cuba and the DPRK that presented a lighthouse of hope for humanity. Cuba is a country that has done so much for the world just out of sheer international solidarity with the little bit that it has. And it's very sad to see that now in its time and need, all of the friends that are willing to speak out at the United Nations year after year against the U.S. blockade have nothing but empty words and very limited forms of humanitarian aid. Why does the world not have the political will to intervene and stop the Trump regime's criminal and genocidal policy of blockade against Cuba? It's for the same reason why the world witnessed more than 2 years of a genocide of the Palestinian people, and virtually no one except maybe the Iranians, Yemeni, and the Lebanese did anything to help Palestinians materially. There's a lot of nice words, as always, and condemnations put out in the United Nations, but as we all know, international law is meaningless. It's all a cover for the real power dynamics that underlie international relations. But just like the Palestinian people, the Cubans are going to resist till the last person in Cuba is left standing. The Cuban Revolution slogan of homeland or death, it's not just an empty catchphrase. It's something that they embody as a principle that they live by. The Cubans prefer a dignified death than a life of submission to U.S. imperialism. It is quite literally in the anthem of the country itself. To die for the homeland is to truly live. Let's hope it doesn't get to the point where they have to make these sacrifices, and that humanity does, at least for Cuba, a little bit of what Cuba has been doing for it since 1959.
America's trying to starve Cuba into doing regime change. They're stopping all oil shipments that are going to Cuba so that Cuba is running out of enough oil to power their power plants. So they're going to run out of electricity, and then their hospitals are going to run out of electricity, and then they're going to run out of the ability to produce food and transport food and do all of these things. And it's going to cause mass starvation and death. And the U.S. government is doing this in hopes of the Cuban people rising up and overthrowing their government. Because America's so terrified of socialism that any country that tries socialism and tries to do things for their people and use their natural resources for their people instead of for some U.S. corporation, the United States military goes in and does whatever they can to make that country collapse. If socialism is such a bad idea, then why does the U.S. government have to spend trillions of dollars making sure that socialist countries can't get off the ground? Cuba never did anything to America. They've never attacked us. They've never done anything like that. And all we've done to that country is embargo them and try to overthrow their leaders and try to destroy their country in every way we possibly can. And we're still doing it. It's just getting worse.
Cuba is telling international airlines that it will run out of aviation fuel tonight, and they should plan accordingly. Additionally, Mexico has announced it will stop shipping oil to Cuba. Mexico is one of the last countries in the Western Hemisphere sending oil to Cuba. The United States is shutting down Cuba and Cuban society as a way to build pressure on the Cuban regime. This is a very good policy by the Trump administration. It is a very good model of leadership by the President and the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, to finally put an end to the Cuban regime by taking out Venezuela's capacity, which was the #1 exporter to Cuba, and now getting the Mexicans to agree to curtail it as well. This is a great, great, great day in the Western Hemisphere for free people to see the Cuban regime beginning rapidly to crumble. And it is all thanks to Donald Trump. Donald Trump does not want to outlast or be outlasted by the Cuban communists. And he has set his mind to it under the influence and suggestions of Marco Rubio. And the President of the United States deserves a lot of credit for doing what no other American president has been able to do. You stop oil flowing into Cuba, and that regime begins to collapse rapidly. And Cuba is advising airlines globally that if they come into Cuba, their planes may not be able to get out because they will be out of aviation fuel thanks to the pressure of the United States government. Thank you, President Trump. Thank you.
Cuba has run out of jet fuel. This video reportedly shows Russian passengers disembarking on a plane that was meant to fly to Cuba because of just that. Cuban aviation authorities released a NOTAM saying that jet fuel won't be available for foreign carriers for a month starting tomorrow. So if carriers like American still want to fly into Havana, for example, they'll need to carry enough fuel for the return journey as well.
Howard, you've seen it. That Cuba is ready to fall. You know? Yes. Cuba looks like it's ready to fall. I don't know if they can hold out. But Cuba now has no income. They got all of their income from Venezuela, from the Venezuelan oil. They're not getting any of it. And Cuba literally is ready to fall. And you have a lot of great Cuban Americans that are going to be very happy about this.
You were just talking about Cuba and what could come next there. Are you considering U.S. action in Cuba?
We're not. I think it's just going to fall. I don't think we need any action. It looks like it's going down. It's going down for the count. You ever watch a fight?
Yeah.
They go down for the count. And Cuba looks like it's going down.
So that's where things stand with Cuba right now. Declared a security threat and blocked from getting oil shipments. It's a tough situation. And we all need to stay informed about what's happening. I really want to hear your thoughts. Drop your comments and let me know what you think. Do you think this is fair? Or do you think it's too harsh on the Cuban people? I'm curious to hear your thoughts, to be honest. And I'm really curious to hear your thoughts. Kindly like this video. Don't forget to hit the like button. Share it with your friends and subscribe so you don't miss any update. Thank you so much for watching. See you in my next video.